From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming indoors on a fairly nice May Washington, D.C. day. My name is Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center here at the Library of Congress, and I'd like to welcome you here today for our inaugural Asian American Literature Today series event featuring poet Tarfia Faizullah. Indeed, come on. Tarfia, you have a lively crowd to work with. We're very excited about this new series. It is an extension of our Asian American Poetry Today series to include not only poets but fiction writers as well. I would like to thank former librarian staffer Reme Gufalda. Where are you, Reme? Who's right there? If you want to stand up. Reme created the old series and included the Poetry and Literature Center in it, and when she retired, the series ended briefly as well. We're happy to bring it back to life. I would also like to thank our new presenting partners, the Smithsonian Asian Pacific Center, the Asian American Literary Review, and the Asian American Studies program at the University of Maryland, and specifically Terry Hong and Lawrence Min Davis for helping us champion Asian American writers. Yes. Oh, last but not least, this event would not be possible without the behind-the-scenes support of the Library of Congress Asian American Association, a staff organization that sponsors events and activities related to Asian Pacific American heritage in the library community. The association was founded in 1994 and so is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. It has helped develop and promote today's event as part of its celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Specifically, I would like to thank Association President Wendy Maloney for her work on behalf of the series and member Kelly Uzawa for getting all parties together to dream it up. So please, let's give them a round of applause too. Before we begin, let me ask you to do what, I don't even need to do it this time. Let me ask you to turn off your cell phones and any other electronic devices that you have that might interfere with our event. Second, please note that this program is being audio and video recorded, and by participating in the question and answer period, you give the Library of Congress permission for future use of this recording. And let me tell you a little bit about the Poetry and Literature Center. We are home to the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, and we put on literary readings, lectures, and panels of all sorts throughout the year. If you would like to find out more about events like this that we put on, please sign our sign-up sheet and pick up information outside in the foyer. You can also check us out on the web at www.loc.gov/poetry. And now on to today's event. Tarfia will read for approximately 30 minutes and will follow with a moderated discussion led by Lawrence Min Davis. We will also leave time at the end for you to ask questions, and of course we'll have a book sales after the event. Lawrence will shortly introduce Tarfia, but first let me tell you about him. He's founding director and current co-editor-in-chief of the Asian American Literary Review, and which is overseeing development of its global digital education project, the Mixed Race Initiative. He is also a consultant with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. Since 2005, he has taught Asian American literature, Asian American film, and mixed race studies for the Asian American Studies program at the University of Maryland. So please join me in welcoming Lawrence Min Davis.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to the Library of Congress for having the vision to make this come to life, and thank all of you for coming today. I have the pleasure and honor of introducing Tarfia. Before I do so, I want to say a little bit about the series and about some of the partners that help make this possible. So, as Rob mentioned, I am a consultant with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, which is the nation's resource on Asian Pacific American history, art, and culture. We currently have an exhibition called Beyond Bollywood, Indian Americans Shape the Nation, up at the National Museum of Natural History, and I'd encourage you to check it out while it's there, along with a number of digital exhibitions. Another partner is the Asian American Studies program at the University of Maryland, which is a vibrant space for research, scholarship, and pedagogy on Asian American history and experience. And then the last partner is the Asian American Literary Review, which is a nonprofit literary arts organization. About the series, one of the things that we're particularly excited about is the DC area as an important hub for Asian American community and arts. And we have this, we had a running series, and now we have these partners that are interested in making this series happen and go on in the future. It's going to be, hopefully the series will run twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. We're excited that we have partners in Asian American Studies programs teaching Asian American literature at universities in the area, at UMBC, at American, at George Washington, at the Naval Academy. And so we see this as an important hub with universities coming together, local communities, folks in the Library of Congress, folks in local communities, a chance to come together and celebrate arts and literature. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Tarfia. The poem Interview with a Birangona No. 4 from her collection Seam ends with the lines, "Don't you know that they made us, made us, made us, made us, made us." Made us evokes the forcible rape of Bangladeshi women during the 1971 liberation war between Bangladesh and Pakistan. The repetition bespeaks the enormity of the atrocity, not a singular act, but systemic sexual slavery, 200,000 women. There's another framing here. They made us, made us. They forced us to force ourselves, to force ourselves, to force ourselves. Layer upon layer of compulsion and compelled participation, complicity. Making us refers to both rape and creation, the naming of the women as raped women, as war heroines, Birangonas, and then their shaming. And what of calling them victims or survivors? More sets of namings and reductions, and who participates in these? And then their silencing in collective memory, their erasure from history. All of us participate. The circle of complicity is impossibly wide. This is the project of Seam, to write back impossibly into the atrocity, mindful of the wide circle of complicity, the positions from which we variously read and write, and name and shame and participate in trauma and violence. This is Tarfia's work, to go searching for humanity while acknowledging, plumbing the extent of, our collective denials of humanity. Praises U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey. In poems made more harrowing for what's not said, we confront the past and its aftermath in the lives of women interrupted by violence and brutality and loss. Tarfia Faizullah is a poet of brave and unflinching vision, and Seam is a beautiful and necessary book. Tarfia earned an MFA in creative writing from Virginia Commonwealth University. Her work has been published in a long list of literary journals and magazines. She is the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships. She lives in Detroit, where she is a writer-in-residence for Inside Out and co-edits the Organic Weapon Arts Chapbook Press with Jamal May. In fall 2014, she will join the University of Michigan Helen Zell Writers Program as the Nicholas Del Banco Visiting Professor in Poetry. Seam is Tarfia's first book, and it is on sale outside after the reading. I encourage you to pick up a copy and get it signed by her. Please join me in welcoming Tarfia Faizullah.
Thanks so much for coming today, y'all. I really appreciate it. I'm always kind of astonished that people are willing to sit down long enough to hear me use my brain work. So I really appreciate y'all being here. And thank you to all of the wonderful organizations that made this possible, to Rob and to Matt and to Lawrence and to so many other people, and Ramey and Asian American Literary Review. It's always kind of, we were just talking earlier about how it seems like every week or every other week there's another article talking about how poetry is dead and nobody cares about poetry, and initiatives like this make me sort of believe that that's not true at all. So thank you for creating a space to share poems. I always tell my high schoolers that I teach creative writing to a couple times a week in Detroit that a poet should be in trouble. So I'm going to start with a new poem that I was just fiddling with like a couple of hours ago, and we'll see how it goes. It's called, very tentatively, Seam. For the nurse. After surgery, you gave me a box that said friends are forever. And even then, garment workers in Bangladesh were gulping the dust, tattooing the soles of their feet. And they're still peddling sewing machines, basting the miniskirt or blazer we wear to the next and next and next hour of scrutiny. Back then, beauty was the vanity littered with jars and powders in my aunt's bedroom. In that corner that was more corner than anywhere else I'd ever been. But those few days you were beside me, you turned me over to rub cream into the angry bumps the ants singed across me. The night I flew into their bed and out of the car, my father fell asleep driving. I wasn't yet anyone who drove straight through the night just because I could. Some corners we try to conceal from ourselves. Like birthdays, my mother unshelved the silver punch bowl to pour a whole liter of 7-Up over a whole uncartoned block of rainbow sherbet. I remember her smiling. I remember smiling. Look, I lost your number, the one you slipped into that gift you didn't have to give me, and it wasn't until my cousin snickered that I understood that the way my aunt would widen and squint at her own fingernails was called crazy, though I got it, that astonishment at the fact of yourself. I hate that I don't remember much about you except what you called me. Sweet little one, as you eased the catheter into all 12 years of me. Honey, you said. I remember you smiling. I remember smiling. I swear to you, I've tried to baptize table, garment, your tenderness, the planks of wood or bolts of fabric fitted to make it. Each scratch cut across it with knives, fingernails, needles, the jagged, uncombed edges that form the longer I try to recall your name, the more any of us try to pull splinters out of seams. So as Lawrence touched on briefly, Seam resides primarily in Bangladesh, where I spent a year on a Fulbright doing research and interviewing the Birangona. And one of the things that I was thinking about was not just the destination of Bangladesh, but also the passage there and back as I was writing this book. This is called En Route to Bangladesh, Another Crisis of Faith, at Dubai International Airport, and ending with a line by Cesare Vallejo. Because I must walk through the eye-shaped shadows cast by these curved gold leaves thick atop each constructed palm tree, past displays of silk scarves, lit silhouettes of blue-bottled perfume, because I grip, as though for the first time, a paper bag of French fries from McDonald's and lick from each fingertip the fat and salt as I stand alone to the side of this moving walkway, gliding me past dark-eyed men who do not stare away when I stare squarely back. Because standing in line to the restroom, I want only to pluck from her black sweater this one shimmering blonde hair clinging fast. Because I must rest the Coke cold in my hand beside this toilet seat warmed by her thighs, and hers. Here, at the narrow mouth of this long, humid corridor leading to the plane, I take my place among this damp, dark horde of men and women who look like me because I look like them, because I am ashamed of their bodies that reek so unabashedly of body, because I can, because I am an American, a star of blood on the surface of muscle. Reading Transformer in Bangladesh for my grandmother. In grandmother's house, we are each a room that must remain locked. Inside it, a prayer mat carelessly folded on a low table, as though the hands that once pressed down on it are not now below ground. Who has stripped bare the white walls of the black velvet tapestry depicting Kaaba, house of God? I let in the netherworld. Something rose from underneath. I sit, wait through my cousin's sobs. This morning, another sudden loss. A classmate's death, she says. Sordid details flare out like sails of a ship. Mother trapped in an asylum, father weeping, his son's warm corpse cradled in his arms, the chicken bone still lodged in his young throat. To whom would this not be in an elegant death? To whom would this not be in an elegant death? A caught bone, so much like one of our own. We enter the familiar city, cloaked nightly in fog, light bulbs, lanterns, blurred gold, the rumbling traffic on the highways, and the silent traffic of ghosts. I reach for my mother's hand like I'm a child. Here hang the years, they sleep with folded wings. Already I want to shed each jagged dirt road here, bodies jostled inside each swerving car, trains draped with bodies dangling like writhing vines. The cars packed tight, do not move. I saw the image of a man moving forward. Sudden as starlight, he lifts an arm, mere bone, wrapped in brown skin, stem of an iris, rotting in water. He wraps the glass. I close my eyes, see the bone of his arm trapped in a young boy's throat. It is still beautiful to hear the heart, but often the shadow seems more real than the body. How thin the seam between the world and the world. A few layers of muscle and fat, a sheet wrapped around a corpse, glass so easily ground into sand. I'm going to read. So one of the things I realized as I was going to Bangladesh, my grandmother, who I was also hoping to record in addition to the Birangona, who I went to interview, she passed away just a few weeks before I went to Bangladesh. And so I thought about that a lot, and the ways in which we lose so much of ourselves when we lose somebody from a previous generation behind us. So I'm going to read a few poems from the sequence that Lawrence alluded to called Interview with the Birangona. And the poems come from conversations that I had with a number of these women who are still living in Bangladesh. They're in their 60s now after having survived the war and what happened to them. The sequence moves back and forth between some approximation of my voice as interviewer and their voice as their persona poems. Instructions for the interviewer. She will say, "There was a time I didn't know there was a hollow inside me until he pushed himself into it. There was a time you learned that inside you was not hollow but seam, color of the rim of the river, tonguing the long dark shore of stone. Reflection of yourself, an endless ripple in corrugated metal, width of the silver bangle, circling her thin, dark arm." Take the tea, she offers. She will say, "There was a time I was young, like you. There was a time you wanted anyone to fill you with blue noise. There was a time you didn't know your own body's worth. Put the porcelain cup down. Let it slide into the saucer's waiting hollow." Interview with the Birangona 1. What were you doing when they came for you? Gleaming water sweeps over mother's feet, bayonets, teeth. My green and yellow sari flaps damply between two palm trees. Grandfather calls to me, Mishti Maya, girl of sweetness. Ashi, I call back. I finish braiding my hair. I tie it tight. I twine a red string around my thigh. That evening, a blade sliced through string, through skin, red on red on red. Kutta, the man in khaki says. It is only later I realize it is me he is calling dog, dog, dog. Interview with the Birangona 2. Where did the Pakistani military take you, and were there others there? Past the apothecary shop, shut down, burned flat. My heart seized, and I told it to hush because they saw its shape and weight, and I know they wanted it too. Past the red mosque where I first learned to touch my forehead low, to utter the wet words blown from my mouth again and again. Past the school draped with banners imploring free our language, a rope steady around my throat as they pushed me toward the dark room. The silence there clotted thick with a rotten smell, dense like pear blossoms, long strands of jute braided fast around our wrists. Yes, there were others there. Interviewer's note 1. You walk past white high-rises seamed with mold, past a child wading through drowned rice fields, one pink blossom tucked behind her ear. Past yourself, rippling a storefront window. Victim, noun, one that is tricked or duped. Past a woman crouched low on a jute mat selling bangles. One that is injured, destroyed under any of various conditions. Was it on a jute mat that she gave birth to the baby, have his or his or his? Victim, a living being sacrificed. Past smoke, helixing from an untended fire. Past another clothesline, heavy with faded saris. For hours they will lift into the wind, hollow of any bruised or broken bodies. Interview with the Birangona 3. Would you consider yourself to be a survivor or a victim? Each week I pull hard, the water from the well, bathe in my sari, wring it out, beat it against the flattest of rocks. Are you Muslim or Bengali? They asked again and again. Both, I said, I'm both. Then rocks were broken along my spine. My hair was a black fist in their hands, pulled down into the river again and again. Each day, each night, river, rock, fist. The river wanders this way, breaks that way. Isn't that always the river's play? Interviewer's note 2. You listen to the percussion of Monsoon Seasons' wet wail. Write in your notebook, Bhalo me, kharap me, choto shundori. Bad girl, good girl, little beauty. In Bangla, it seems, there are words for every kind of woman but a raped one. The interviewer acknowledges desire. Here, on this concrete sidewalk, swelling its relentless tide of debris and bodies shouldering past other bodies. Here, deep in her own body, pulsing with the weight of the rickshawalla's persistent pedaling. Here, in this skin-thin filigree of dusk settling over this marketplace, in which she acknowledges desire. This bouquet of dried twigs a child cradles in her arms, this fruit, overripe, tossed into rivulets of human waste. Each night she remembers his mouth, thighs, throat. Dreams she gives herself over to, the wincing tincture of sweat and hunger waking her nightly. Come back to her before she says no, like this child who clasps now her small, dirty fingers onto her wrist, asks her for anything. I have nothing, she says, turning over her hands, holding them cupped open like the split halves of a pried-open shell. reading Willa Cather in Bangladesh. And it begins with a brief quote from her novel, Song of the Lark. Together they lifted a lid, pulled out a drawer, and looked at something. They hid it away and never spoke of what they had seen, but neither of them forgot it. Each day I begin to disappear into yards of silk or cotton. The one that is me but not begins to emerge, coaxed out by each hand pressed against me, its desire to remember. Cousin, aunt, beggar, vendor, then rain slanting like sheets flung out, hung up, then rooftops, skin thin, light bulbs swaying like newspapers clipped to clothesline after clothesline, then smell after pungent smell, rising from gutter to rooftop, fruit, rot, spice, body. It is the sea itself. It belongs and does not belong to me. In my room, I lift lids, pull out drawers, measure time by each object left behind. String, sandal, bead. I watch the servant sweep floors and wide bamboo-bristled arcs, knowing she dressed in a thatched hut before dawn, grasping and tucking the long veil around her acid-burnt face, its countries of new skin. I do not ask her how. I thank her for the cup of tea. I am afraid to look her in the eye, its dark pupil the same shape and size of pearls that are wrapped around my neck as my hair is teased up, then out. I startle at glimpses of my throat, at my cheek in a mirrored tray, each soft inch of skin fractured by a white bristled brush, these leftover tracings of pale powder smoothed over my cumin dark skin. So my partner, who is also a poet, when he's doing readings, he does this great thing where he'll read some dark poems and then he'll say, you know, I think if you're going to take people to Mordor, then you should take them back to the Shire afterwards, which is great, right? Which I was like, yeah, that's a great idea, except I realized that I have only Mordor poems, really. But hopefully, I really wanted Seam to end more optimistically, because it's a book that deals with such difficult stories and such a, you know, deeply problematic and complex narrative and history. And it was really important to me that we sort of like write poems that look to the future and look towards the light, rather than just sort of like sitting in the darkness, as comfortable as that is sometimes. So I'm just going to read the last poem in the book, and then Seam has these funny little prose bits that are sort of neither prose poems nor fiction nor nonfiction. So I'm going to read those last two things from Seam and then turn over to some new poems. Maybe this is halfway between the Mordor and the Shire. Maybe there's like a little valley that people are hanging out in. En route to Bangladesh, another crisis of faith. We pass over heavy shadows of large clouds, pinned to train cars lined up like unused blocks of colored chalk, red, then green, blue, then orange, until we are propelled higher, and the trains are swallowed by these jagged strictures of land that are no longer sand, nor rock, nor water, but a child's drawing instead, until the distant ocean is the only fabric that fills this punched-out plastic hole of a window, that is the blue that falls over everything, that is everything, blue on blue on blue, like the one seam of light left always on the airplane ceiling that the pale plastic shades cannot shut away, until that narrow vein of light is the only belief left, a cream-thick ribbon across our eyes. I struggled my way onto a packed bus. I became all that surged past the busy roadside markets, humming with men pulling rickshaws, heavy with bodies. A light breeze from the river was cool on our faces through the open windows. Eager passengers ran alongside us. The bus slowed down, and a young man grabbed those arms, pulled them through. The moon filled the dust-polluted sky, a ripe, unsheathed lychee. It wasn't enough light to see clearly by, but I still turned my face towards it. So I've been working on a second book called Register of Eliminated Villages, and I was raised in West Texas, and I think Register kind of dwells primarily there. It was a really interesting thing to go through puberty in West Texas as a South Asian, as a Bangladeshi Muslim, and so I've been kind of, without the help of a therapist, revisiting my childhood a lot, and I'm just going to read a couple of poems from that. This is called Feast or Famine. When the night gapes wider, the child you once were wakes and chokes with hunger, and you begin to soothe her as you always do. First with hunger, and then more hunger, because it's summer, because the days are longer, because you have to keep her lean, because yes, she has to learn to want, because yes, she has to train to run through spring, its melting forest of primitive stars, to follow the path of water far from your parents, far from the scars left by the man who pinned you to yourself. When the night blows open, you tell the little girl in West Texas you still are and once were, to go back to sleep, to curl inside the rise and fall of your lover, asleep beside you. This man who loves her and you. That she doesn't have to steal the past anymore. That kida lage in Bangla can mean I feel hunger, as well as I want you. That the milk-fat swell of the belly of sorrow's gluttony will only disappear when she starves you. Kida lage, you whisper to the man who strokes her hair and devours your mouth, and the ghosts whittle into whispers flayed of their lost appetites. Listen, even now they gather in the narrow larynxes of cruel men, their mouths open and ready to feast. Anatomy model. Speeding across the flatlands of West Texas, you are the girl laid down again in the backseat of the old Suburban. Hours your sisters slept, you watched clouds cluster into familiar gray mountains. Imagine the other side of the storm your father crashed through was a world where dead meant nothing more than elsewhere. Your lost love retrieved from cracks forked in stone below a cliff, your sister's heart restored, and between their transparent fingertips, the fresh feather of a sparrow, the thorn scrim of tumbleweed. How badly you want to rest here a while, among trembling fists of bluebonnets, scoring each hollow of brown grass. You pass on your way through small town after small town, each boasting the best barbecue, football team, strong boys, prettiest girls. The best of everything is what I've always given you, your father reminded you, as you watched your sister help him open chamber after plastic chamber of a model human heart, wanting to be the one unclasping each metal hinge, holding red valve, blue ventricle, then hooked aorta, every chiseled vein. Already you are jotting down this memory too. Already it is an artifact it never was. Already you are adding to it the purity of this grass now rippling through sudden rain. When he slipped that stethoscope's blunt buds into your ears, let you listen to the sounding of your own heart. You didn't protest, and when he tapped you there, said, if this is gone, you will be gone too. You imagined not blue fist, but his cracked palm, beating inside your chest. Just outside Eden, Texas, you are emerging from the other side of this thick storm, and you are driving past tall, thin windmills, knifing wind, knifing rain, with long white blades. There is still no cleaving, this loss you will not name, like the porcelain doll whose hair you once brushed over and over until not a single curl remained. How are you guys doing? It's so quiet. I'm going to read just a couple more short poems Thank you again so much for having me and for being here. I'm just, yeah, thank you. I think I'm more nervous than I've ever been in my entire life, so thank you. This is called When I Say Desire. I mean this hand lifting only because it must be fitted to pericardium, each vein of ink across white sheets. When I say quick conjecture of epicardium and myocardium, I mean light, incarnadine through holes in red paper. Get over here before I say no. Get over here before I say no. Valve against ventricle. Show up with your name held between your teeth. Call it mothwing, bright coal shuddering with flame, milk tongue. Be the arteries of wind unlocking the widower's window in this unpainted atrium no thief ever tries to enter. I fell in love recently, so there have been a lot of love poems. But I'm going to end with one more poem, and again, thank you so much for being here. And yeah. This is called I Told the Water. I told the water, you're right, the dead are broken sidewalks we tried to avoid. Told it, the map of you folds into corners small enough to swallow. I told the water, you only exist because of thirst. Beside your glistening membrane, I lie face down in dirt. The first time my father threw me into you, I was hieroglyph, a wet braid caught in your throat. I knew then how war was possible, the urge to defy gravity, to disarm another. I knew then I would kill to be your mirror. You, graveyard of windows, you, black-eyed barnacle. I told the water. Last night, I walked out onto the ice, wearing only my skin, because you did not tell me not to. Thanks so much.
So, you all doing okay? Yeah. Great. So I want to start by going back in the scene a little bit, and maybe you could share a story that you shared with me. We talked about the leaving of Birangona and touching your hair.
Oh yeah. Okay. So one of the things about going to Bangladesh on the Fulbright was I told myself that it would be a mistake to go in with any high expectations. I'm really OCD, and so it's it was not unlikely that I would try to put together some sort of bulleted plan of attack for my year in Bangladesh, but I really wanted to go and just sort of be open to what was going to happen there. And one of the most moving and extraordinary moments I had in interviewing the Birangona was I was interviewing an entire family of sisters who had been taken as sex slaves during the war. And I was interviewing one sister, and another sister came up behind me and started playing with my hair. Now, in Bangladesh, it's typical that you don't see a lot of naturally curly hair. Upper class women tend to go to salons or have hair straighteners, and like working class women tended to hang their hair and tie it back. So you didn't see a lot of just and strangely, my curly hair was the thing, even though as Bangladeshi, as you know, my curly hair was the one thing that was pointing out there. So the sister came up behind me. And she started combing through my hair, and she said, "You poor thing, you must have nobody to comb your hair for you." And it was just that. It was this funny, horrible moment, where I sort of had these ideas about, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to interview these women, I'm going to collect their stories, and and to have that moment happen where this woman who had undergone such incredible trauma and distress during the war was feeling sorry for me because I didn't have anyone to comb my hair. And I've thought back, I tried to write a poem about it, and I just never really could. I think because sometimes we look at these poems, and they're supposed to be failures, I think, so we can learn something from them. And that was a poem that was a failure, but I feel like I keep returning to that story in different ways.
So along those lines, that story makes me think of something in the late 90s. The author Cesare Vallejo came out with this novel, Just Your Life, and he tells a story, part of the story, or the backstory, are comfort women who were sexual slaves. And there are critiques that came out afterwards that the way he wrote about them sort of froze them into victimhood, or that it was a kind of denial of humanity. And that this kind of insistence on their victimhood kept them from a kind of fuller complexity as human beings. And it's a charge that the way we think about comfort women more generally in political space, political discourse, that's true as well. And so I know that that's something that you grappled with, and you kind of see it on the page, you grappling with it. I wonder if you could talk about that issue or that problem and how you approached it as a poet.
I sort of, when I think about what happened to not just the Birangona or the comfort women, but women in Bosnia, women here in the United States who have been raped or been the victims of sexual assault, I always sort of think about how, as artists, there is no way that we can ever capture the horrific violence that was done to them, nor can we make up for it, nor can we replace it, nor can we change it. I think the only thing we can do is trouble the way we think about it. And so for me, I was sort of troubling the way I was thinking about these women, and the scaffolding of the interview sort of allowed me a space to comment on how problematic it was to be trying to write about any of this at all in the first place. And I think that I still think that Seam is a problematic book. It's a book that necessarily has to be problematic in order to, I think, even begin to come close to describing or enacting the complexity of that kind of widespread trauma, especially one that is state mandated. So I think that the only thing we can really do is risk being wrong when it comes to being artists. And I think Cesare Vallejo and other artists who have tried to write poetry that deals with these difficult subject matters, I imagine that we all sort of feel similarly as though we have failed in some way, but that there was something in the failure of it, again, like the poem I was talking about, that can potentially be learned from, so that hopefully in the future we don't make the same mistakes, or we can catch it as it is starting, or we can try to view that as a more complex thing, rather than sort of deciding that women are just victims or just survivors, or that any of us have to be singular things at all. The time I spent with the Birangona actually was often marked not by intense conversations about what had happened to them during the war, but just hanging out. You know, like they were like, "Are you married? Do you like the way this boy looks in this magazine? You know, like what do you like to do when you're not here?" And so a lot of it was just empathy, was just getting to know each other and appreciating each other and enjoying each other. And I feel like both have to happen simultaneously, I think, in order for us to confront the problems of these issues, is that it has to be both empathy and kind of the more objective lens that can render. That's the way that I chose to approach it. But again, I think that any attempt at it is problematic, but worth the risk of failing.
I wonder maybe if you could say a little bit about the public life of the book and your relationship to the project. You know, thinking through these questions now, having published it, having given readings on it, having had conversations, and it having a kind of public dimension to it, where it's not just a kind of your singular conversation with these women and your imaginative working through, but a kind of set of dialogues across the country, and then also existing beyond your hands with readers that you're not necessarily interacting with directly. and your sense of that expansion and your relationship to the project on the basis of how it's kind of blossoming from there.
I had no idea what to expect in terms of the reception of the book. And I actually, before I went to Bangladesh, I didn't really know any other Bangladeshi people of my generation besides my family and cousins. And I grew up, like I said, like I grew up in West Texas, and I just kind of, I don't know, like I felt like I was kind of a strange person who had trouble making friends. So, so I didn't really start meeting a lot of Bangladeshi people until I moved to Bangladesh for a year, and Noshi and I see over there, I met in Bangladesh. And that was kind of the beginning of what has been probably the most moving part of the response to SEAM, which is that it's brought out of the woodwork all of these really amazing Bangladeshi artists and writers of my generation. And I've gotten to sort of like create this family that I kind of always longed for, of people who I could see myself reflected in more, that I didn't feel like I had growing up in West Texas. And so that's been one thing that's been really amazing. I did a reading at Southern Illinois University Press, and a young Bangladeshi woman who was born and raised in Bangladesh came afterwards and talked to me and said nice things about the book. And I've always been, ever since I wrote it, scared about what other Bangladeshis would think, because I'm writing towards their culture and within that culture that belongs to me, but belongs to me in a very different way, because I was born and raised in America. And so I was really concerned about how that would be received. And so I was really relieved and delighted that that there were so many different Bangladeshis of different generations and different professions who seem to have that SEAM has resonated with. That's been an incredible gift. Other than that, I feel like what you said is just kind of, it's this, you know, like, I think it was, maybe it was Philip Larkin who said that a poem is a machine, a little machine made of words. And I feel like a book is this kind of larger machine. And I've just kind of really let it do its own thing. And sometimes I'm surprised where it'll end up, or in whose hands it will be, or, you know, whether or not people respond to it. On a core level, I think, like, I believe poetry can, you know, at the risk of sounding super sentimental, but I really do believe poetry can save lives. It saved mine in a lot of ways, and a lot of women there have been a number of women who were raped who have reached out to me and said that they really responded to SEAM, and that's been kind of an amazing gift. When I sat down to write the book, I wasn't sure of anything but that the poems seemed urgent and they were coming fast. I wrote most of SEAM while I was in Bangladesh really quickly, and I'm a very slow writer, so there was something very summoned about it that felt really profound to me in the moment. And so I've just been, more than anything, just surprised and delighted by the different kinds of responses it's gotten, and how nice it is to kind of, like I said, let it have its own cogs and wheels and do its own thing.
As you're talking about other kind of meeting Bangladeshi-American writers, I was thinking of, you posted like a week ago a review of the new novel by Zia Rahman.
Oh, yeah.
And I haven't got to read it yet, but I'm wondering if you could think for us, you know, this is Asian American literature today, thinking about maybe your sense of Asian American literature today, but starting with Bangladeshi-American literature today, the kind of this emergence of poets, the ones that you've met as you're touring or through reading, and without making kind of grand statements about this is where we're going or what we're doing, just your characterization of what you're seeing and what strikes you.
Okay. So I've met a lot of really amazing Bangladeshi writers, and when I say a lot, I mean like 3. but that's very nice that there are 3 more of us. But there are some really, I think this is just, we were talking about this earlier, this is a really exciting and astounding time for American poetry in general, I think. It's just, yeah, like I heard some snaps, exciting. It's so incredible because there are all of these bridges being formed between all these different, not just poets or schools of poetry or aesthetics or cultures, but genres as well. A couple of the folks I've met are actually fiction writers. Her name is Tanvi Nandini Islam, and her novel Bright Lights comes out with Viking Penguin next year, I think. And her focus is botany, which I think is really interesting as a way of thinking about identity. And then there's Zubair Ahmed, whose book City of Rivers came out with McSweeney's, and that's also it's sort of more it's weirdly surreal but accurate. Have you all ever had that experience where you come across something surreal and you're like, that is so much more accurate than something more realistic would be? And so his poems are these like beautiful kind of little shadow boxes, and they're just stunning. And Dilruba Ahmed, she was the first contemporary American poet that was Bangladeshi who published a book in America a few years ago. Her book is called Taka Dust, and she's also amazing. I'm trying to think about if there's anybody else that I'm missing. But those are just a few people. And the thing that I think is so exciting about those other writers is that they're all so vast. We're all so vastly different from each other, and our focuses are different. The aesthetic, approach is different. And I think that's really important in sort of ensuring that Asian American literature or diasporic literature doesn't become one note. Like that we're not just, necessarily receiving narratives, and, not every single poem has to have a mango, sari, or arranged marriage in it, I promise. And I actually think that it's empowering to sort of be encouraged in spaces like Asian American Literary Review, Asian American Studies programs all over the country, Kundiman, which is an Asian American poetry collective that creates a retreat every year, 5-day retreat at Fordham University for Asian American poets to come together and learn from each other and learn from really incredible faculty. So like I said, I think that this is just a really exciting time where there are so many young writers who are writing from such different perspectives and such different worldviews, and are really honoring the multiplicity and the different way that that they feel about America or the world around us, or their own interior lives. I think it's really a wonderful time. That said, there's always a lot more work to do, I think, and the Poetry Foundation not too long ago came out with a list of Asian American poets, and that list had some negative responses, particularly from other Asian American poets, because of course, like any list, it's not comprehensive, it's incomplete, it fails the way all lists fail. But it's a good first attempt, and organizations, powerhouse organizations like the Poetry Foundation have been really responsive to changing the list of poets, or taking away, at the very beginning they had the countries of origin right beside the author's name, and of course a lot of people were, I don't identify with that, or I don't think of myself as Korean, or I don't think of myself that way. So there's still a lot of, I think, vocabulary around the question of race politics that we're still trying to wrestle, and I think indeed we'll probably still always be wrestling with how to write that accurately, and how to create a vocabulary such that we're constantly celebrating the progress that we're all making as poets and as Asian American writers, or any kind of, whether it's a African American poet or a Latino poet. I think we're all sort of still trying to both, again, celebrate the progress we've made, as well as interrogating what we've done before and what we're doing now, so that hopefully we can just get closer and closer to being more accurate, and having it be such that we don't have to answer questions like, well, where are you from? And when we say Texas, the response is no, but where are you really from? My hope is that in the future, that those aren't questions that that are necessarily ones that can sometimes sort of like smack of the implication that there's only a few different ways to be American. I think we're hopefully moving in a direction where that's no longer quite the case.
So I think we have time for a few audience questions before we turn things over to a book signing. So is there any folks in the audience that would like to pose questions to Tarfia?
That's a good question. Where are you applying?
There's an MA program in Ireland I'm really interested in.
Oh, cool. So I think the thing that was told to me repeatedly and seemed to have served me well was to be as specific as possible in your application, as well as to make a strong argument for why you should or could be in that country, because the basis of the Fulbright program, or sort of the impulse behind it, is to create a kind of ambassadorship where people are sort of given the opportunity to go abroad and do independent research or teach English or whatever, and to come back sort of sharing what they've learned abroad. And so I think that the argument that necessitates you actually being in that country, the stronger that is, I think the closer you are to having a better chance at getting the Fulbright. But I'm not speaking for the Fulbright Foundation when I say that. But I think that seems to have been true for a lot of the people I know who just got a Fulbright. I want to shout out my friend Michelle, who just got a Fulbright. She's another really great Asian American poet who lives in the DC area. So she might actually be also a good person to talk to. But yeah, I would say being very specific, and also I think like it doesn't hurt, because those applications can tend to be a little bit, I think that sometimes it's easier to sort of be, I'm trying to think of the right word here, a little less personal in your application, but you basically have 3 pages, unless I'm mistaken, where a personal statement and the 2 statement of, and I would think of it as 3 pages that you can use to present your project, and not just your project, but yourself and what's compelling you to go abroad. So that's a little bit of stuff, maybe that's helpful.
I take issue with the idea of being asked, where are you from? I'm from New Jersey. No, where are you really from? Because I was riding a cab today, and it was obvious he was not Caucasian, but a foreigner. 20 years from now, it will be the same situation. He asks me, where are you from? I say, I'm from the Philippines. And he says, oh, yeah, that's right. You know, I should have guessed that. I said, where are you from? I mean, the idea is that it doesn't have to be a Caucasian asking it. It doesn't have to be a resident of America asking it. In 20 years, all of us will be color-oriented. But there's always that question. You're so interesting, I gotta find out what your heritage is. I don't want to be generic. I want to maintain what I brought into this country and what I will bring out. So I'm not sure whether it's a flaw to be asked.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
I really appreciate that, because I think what I'm hoping for is that the conversation is more complex generally, and that it isn't so much that there's only one right response to the answer, right? It doesn't have to be either Bangladeshi or Filipino or American. The point is that we are all multiple things. So I lived in Alabama for a year, which is a story that would take really a long time to tell. But I lived in Alabama for a year, and I worked at this theater, the box office of a Shakespeare theater. And this woman came up to me, and she was like, I just have to ask, what are you? And I was feeling really cranky. I hadn't had enough Diet Coke that day. So I said Homo sapiens. I was being really snarky. And she said, oh my gosh, you're gay? And I was like, this is not a conversation that's actually about to happen. But it's my lunch break, and let's just keep going with it. So eventually, after a lot of back and forth, you know, she was like, well, where are you from? Texas. No, but where are you really from? Brooklyn. You know, like, and what I wanted was really for, and maybe it's not so much the question, but the articulation of the question, where are you from, right? Because I wanted her to ask me a more complex question, so that I could give her the complex answer. And so eventually I said, you know, my family's from Bangladesh, and I consider myself a Bangladeshi-American. And she goes, oh my gosh, I knew you were Middle Eastern. And so, true story. So I turned my laptop screen around, and I was like, here's Bangladesh, here's the Middle East, they're different places. And I was like, we had this real kind of moment, and I was like, wow, that was really great. And then the next morning, I stopped at the gas station. This was a time where I was drinking like 48 ounces of Diet Coke every single day. I'm not proud of it. But I stopped to get my usual 32 ounces of Diet Coke, and she was there with her husband. And she nudged him, and she was like, "Oh my God, Tom, it's the gay Middle Eastern girl from yesterday." And I was like, "No, but we did such good work together." And so that's, I mean, it's a funny story, but I think that gets at what you're saying, which is that it's, yes, I mean, these pearls that I'm wearing are from Bangladesh. It's important to me every time I do a reading that I'm wearing something that was made in Bangladesh. And the cover of my book is a Bangladeshi artist. But the ways in which we're involved in being wherever we from, whatever it is that we are, I think deserves more complex questions than where are you from. And I guess that's my issue. Not so much that we have to be, I just don't want us to have to be singular, because I don't think any of us really are.
Maybe we have time for a question or two more. Yes, in the gentleman in the middle, or I'm sorry.
I guess I was curious about your relationship with subject matter, because it seems like this book couldn't have been written without the research and having gone there. It sounds like the new work you're working on is you're delving into memory. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about when you make these decisions about, where do the poems come from? How do I come to the page? What are your sources? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard question, Jen. I think that when I first started writing the poems, the interview poems specifically, I was writing them in grad school in Richmond, Virginia, just down the road. And I was writing them imaginatively, kind of culled from a few small things that I knew. That was part of the impulse to apply for the Fulbright in the first place, was to go. And then once I sort of did the math and realized that a lot of these women were still alive, I felt really strongly that I should go to Bangladesh and ask and speak to them myself, because I felt like I was running into an ethical dilemma of writing these poems, speaking for them without actually having spoken to them. But that being said, I think that that's an interesting ethical dilemma for a poet, or for anyone really. And I still feel that regardless of research, imagination and craft are still probably the two things that drive me more than research does. For me, research was this way of sort of opening up a thing that I'd only been thinking of in these other ways. And so research gave me more for my imagination, gave me more thinking about craft. For example, the book has these poems that are reading these works of literature, non-Bangladeshi literature while in Bangladesh, like reading Ceylon at the Liberation War Museum, or one of them that I read, reading Transformer in Bangladesh. And I feel like, in a way, that was as much research. Being in Bangladesh and reading somebody like Transformer on a bus in the middle of the countryside was as much research as sitting down and interviewing these women, or reading history textbooks, or reading books about women being raped. So I guess I felt like I wanted to approach the poems in as myriad ways as the poem necessitated. And some poems required less or more research depending on the poem. And like I said, I just wanted to be open to whatever the poem needed or was asking for. Not in that creepy, my poems have Teddy Ruxpin voices of their own kind of way, but more in this kind of like, like watching a poem, like the first poem of my book, 1971, which is a poem that was written after speaking to my mother, who was an 8-year-old during the war, and realizing that when she was there during the war, when she was living during the war, her strongest memory of that time isn't about the war at all. It's about her mother, my grandmother, bathing in the old pond behind their house. And I was really struck by that this entire country was being torn apart by violence, and my mother remembers this beautiful ritual instead. And so, again, I felt like I wanted the entire book to represent a number of voices and a number of approaches. And I hope that the research is sort of a gentle hand, or sort of like, I guess, one of many things that the book is doing. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
To what extent, to what extent do you think, in the course of your writing process, does the oral presentation of your poems play into the way you construct your work on the page? And where does the intersection of the reading versus the writing lie, if at all?
A lot, actually. I read my poems out loud all the time, and I tend to compose verbally sometimes, which I think has always been a part of my process, because poetry, one of the great gifts of it is its music, I think. And I also think that poetry didn't start as a written thing. I mean, it started as an oral tradition, and the advent of the printing press created, I think, more of an impulse or a compulsion to actually render poetry on the page. And so I feel like it still is a great tool in terms of literacy. And I still believe very strongly that poetry should be both work in the air and on the page simultaneously. So it's a huge part of it. One of my earliest educations as a poet was going to slams in high school and in college. And that was before I took a single creative writing class. I didn't major in English or creative writing, so for me, like, but I'd always written poetry and cared about it. And I come from this culture. Bengali culture is highly literary, and so much of it is verbal and orally shared. When I was in Bangladesh, a common question was, what do you do? And I would say, I'm a poet. And they would say, no, I mean, we're all poets. What do you actually do? And so, again, sort of like, how words sort of live in the air has always been really important to me. And the chapbook press I co-run with Jamal May, who has kind of like done this very interesting thing of sort of like creating a bridge between slam and page with a lot of his work, and I think that that's increasingly happening more and more. Split This Rock, Sarah Browning, who's the head of Split This Rock, is here, and she's done a lot to sort of bring a lot of those voices together, I think, of voices that are on the page and live in the air too. So it's not just an important part of my process, but I think it's just important, period, for the world of poetry, that those bridges continue to be formed and we continue to honor the words living in the air and on the page.
Well, thanks so much to Tarfia, and thank you to Lawrenceman Davis and all of the sponsors for this program. Seam is for sale outside. Please get a copy. I'm sure Tarfia would be happy to sign 1 or 2 or 5 or how many you want to buy. And please look to our website in the Asian American Literary Review to see what the next program is that we do in the fall, and see you there too. Thanks.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.